let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, my name is Ben Norquist. I'm the director of Evangelicals for the Middle East, and we so appreciate you being here for this important conversation. We also want to say thank you to our co-sponsor, Churches for Middle East Peace, or CMEP for short. We're working very closely with CMEP on all sorts of things and really appreciate their partnership. And I want to say thank you to each of you for being here as well. We recognize that for so many of us, time is short and rare and precious. And so the fact that you're offering us your time today and your attention is a gift, and we're grateful to you for that. So thank you. Those of you who have just logged in, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, your name and where you're coming in from. But thank you for being here. Also want to make a note that we are recording this session, and this session will be available afterwards as well. We'll post it on YouTube and share it with those of you who have registered with your email. And we invite you to share the video with your networks. We think that it's an important conversation for a lot of people to engage with and hear. I want to take just a moment to set the table for our discussion before I introduce our panelists. The theme, as we wrote it for this event, is this. I'm gonna read what we wrote. Given the lack of understanding and historic tensions, American evangelicals largely overlook opportunities to build relationships with Muslims. Given the conflation of Muslims and the Middle East in the American imagination, times of crisis in the Middle East further complicate relations. This webinar features a discussion between a Lebanese-American Muslim, a Palestinian Evangelical, and an American Evangelical, reflecting together about the challenges and opportunities for interreligious cooperation in pursuit of understanding and peace. That's what we wrote. That's what was in the promotional material for this event. And I just want to offer a few more words to kind of extend this theme and set the table for our discussion. And I'm going to do that by pulling together just a few threads that I see are drawn together at the nexus of this relationship between evangelicals and Muslims. So here are a few of those themes. Orientalist views of the Middle East and a strong association between the Middle East and the Muslim community in the American imagination, even though the Muslim community is global. And as an extension, Muslims may suffer sometimes in the American imagination of evangelicals from Orientalist perspectives and dehumanizing ideas and evaluations. Another thread. Some parts of the Muslim community and evangelical communities hold traditional values, find overlapping alliances and resonance in those values in the context of a permissive secular culture. Another thread has to do with intersectionality and intersecting and overlapping identities that can challenge common stereotypes. For American evangelicals, the existence of Arab evangelicals disrupts flat notions of who an evangelical is and who a Middle Easterner is. And for Middle Easterners, the existence of Arab Americans might complicate perceptions of America and so on and so forth. And then finally, I just want to comment too, just put out there on that table for us to think about the silence of the American evangelical community on what's been happening in Gaza. The willingness to stand against anti-Semitism, but not against anti-Arab or anti-Muslim discrimination or violence among American evangelicals has the potential to produce strong dissonance among Muslim observers. So there's a lot to think about, and those are just threads that I'm bringing. Each of our panelists has their own themes and threads and concerns that they'll bring to us for consideration. So let me turn to our panel. I am so grateful for each of these people for your time and for the stories and insights that you're going to be sharing. So let me start with our first panelist. Safi Kaskas is the translator of the Qur'an, A Contemporary Understanding, and author of the Qur'an with References to the Bible, the translation of the Qur'an, for which Safi worked with a group of evangelical Christians to include cross-references to Old and New Testament texts. With his study of the early followers of Jesus and the development of the early church, he became a regularly invited speaker at universities and colleges and churches on reconciliation between evangelicals and American Muslims. Dr. Kaskas serves as a board member of Track 5. Here we are. An organization working on faith-based conflict resolution, and is invited to speak on a regular basis at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. on such topics as reconciliation, the Qur'an, and Jesus' teachings. Dr. Kaskas is also co-founder of East West University, just down the road from where I live in Chicago, Illinois. And he just pointed out to me that that university is getting close to 50 years on now. Our second panelist, Botrus Mansour, is a Palestinian Christian, a lawyer, a writer, and a church leader from Nazareth. Botrus is a leader at Nazareth Baptist School, the sole recognized evangelical school in Israel. He holds his law degree from Hebrew University in Jerusalem and an MBA from Haifa University, and has worked as a lawyer in Nazareth for many years. He's also held leadership positions in several nonprofit organizations, including Musalaha, Advocates International, and Nazareth Evangelical Theological Seminary. Botrus gives lectures and contributes articles to various publications on issues relating to Arab Christians. His book, When Your Neighbor is the Savior, was published in 2011. And finally, Elise is Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace, CMEP for short, a position that she has held since 2016. An ordained pastor in the Evangelical Covenant Church, her ministry and professional background includes serving as the Senior Director of Advocacy and Outreach for World Vision US, the Executive Pastor of Hillside Covenant Church in Walnut Creek, California, Director of Development and Transformation for Extension Ministries at Willow Creek Community Church in Barrington, Illinois, and as a consultant to the Middle East for child advocacy issues for Compassion International. May's PhD is in American History and Middle Eastern Studies from the University of California, Davis. She focused her dissertation on the history of the American Protestant Church in Israel and Palestine. Cannon's Doctorate of Ministry and Spiritual Formation is from Northern Theological Seminary. She holds an MDiv from North Park Theological Seminary, an MBA from North Park University School of Business and Nonprofit Management, and an MA in Bioethics from Trinity International University. Cannon completed her Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of Chicago in History, Philosophy, Social Studies of Science, and Medicine. And I just want to pause once more and say thanks to each of you for being a part of this discussion today. We're excited about your contributions and looking forward to learning from you. Just to give a brief overview now of the next few minutes together that we'll spend in this event, each of our panelists will offer a few introductory remarks, 10 or 15 minutes apiece. And then I am inviting them to engage with each other in a discussion that you will have a chance to listen in on. And at some point then in that discussion, I'm going to start pulling in your questions as well. So right now I want to pause and invite you, as you're listening to the discussion, as you're listening to these introductory remarks, feel free to be submitting your questions, because we'll draw on those questions when we get to that part of the program. And as you submit those questions, please do not use the chat for that. Please use the Q&A function, which you should see a button along the bottom of the browser window. It says Q&A. open that up and you can submit your questions that way. And again, feel free to start submitting your questions as they occur to you, and then we'll pull them in at the right time in the program. And with that, I'm gonna stop talking and invite Safi to offer your remarks. Thank you so much, Safi.
Thank you. I would like to start by saluting everybody here the way Jesus saluted his disciple, Shalom Aleichem, and the way we learned as Muslims to salute each other, Assalamu Alaikum. And you all would notice that the two are the same, peace be upon you, or peace be with you. And people in the Middle East, when they wish each other peace, when they encounter each other, it's telling the other that we have a safe space between us. We can sit down, talk safely, especially when the other would reply to the salute of peace by saying, wa alaykum salam, and peace be upon you. So I like to tell everybody, Salamu alaikum, and peace be with you, so we can have a space of peace that is between us, so we can talk to each other, knowing that our heart is anchored in peace, God willing. I'm going to start by talking to you about my personal life and draw on that to talk about the relationship I had with evangelicals in the United States since 1969, when I first arrived to the United States. Now, I was born in Beirut, Lebanon, as everybody heard. And in Beirut, Lebanon, we mostly have Catholics, Maronite Christians. And we have 17 different factions of various Christian and Muslims in Lebanon. So Lebanon is an example of people living together in peace most of the time. Well, again, when I first came to the United States, everybody around me was basically Christian, mostly evangelicals. And out of either naivete or just a good heart, wanted to build goodwill. So I started talking to everybody about where I'm from, about my faith, and about the commonalities I see with my Christian and specifically evangelical friends. All this actually came to an end on 9/11. The day 9/11 took place, I was overseas in Saudi Arabia doing a project for a Saudi businessman. My wife was here in the States with my two boys, Omar and Yasser, who were going to George Mason University in Northern Virginia. And that day, it was a disastrous day, bad memories for everyone involved. And my wife later on during the day, that same day, received a call from a friend of ours informing her that there will be a prayer vigil in a place in Arlington, Virginia. And she invited my wife to join that prayer vigil. And my wife thought it will be good to take my two boys there. And since she will have to leave them and join me in Saudi Arabia after a while, she thought they will at least have a community of people who know them that might be good for them. So she went there, where they were sitting in a circle praying for the president, for the Attorney General, for all the American government people. And suddenly my wife heard somebody praying for Osama bin Laden. She was shocked. It was a new experience for her. She didn't imagine on 9/11 somebody will be doing this, and she started crying. Of course, my two boys were bewildered, were shocked, didn't know what's going on. Later on, when my wife was on her way back home, she called me to Saudi Arabia. And she said, Safi, you'll never guess what happened tonight. I was in a prayer vigil, and some of these people prayed for Osama bin Laden. I said, if they prayed for their enemies, they must be Jesus followers. They must have learned this from Jesus. I said, what do they call themselves, the group of people you were with? She said, they call themselves Jesus followers. I said, that's it. From that day on, we committed to get closer to that group of people. And we've been in a relationship for the last, for over 20 years now. To make the long story short, not long from that day, United States decided to attack Afghanistan and then decided to attack Iraq. And all of this was in relation to 9/11. So I came to a conclusion. My conclusion was there are two kinds of Christians that I have been observing in the United States. One group seek revenge. The other pray for their enemies. This is basically why we decided to get closer to the group who prays for their enemies. And from that day on, we had a relationship with that group, and the relationship, it's still going on, and it's very strong. Now, as a Muslim, I seek those who claim to be Jesus followers, and I try to work closely with them. However, building bridges between evangelicals in general and Muslims, especially during crisis in the Middle East, is a multifaceted endeavor, and that requires a deep commitment to understanding, respect, and shared value based on the Qur'an, which teaches, we have assigned each of you a law and a way of life. If God had wanted, he could have made all of you a single community. But instead, he is testing you by means of what he has revealed to you. So compete in doing what is good. I'll repeat. So compete in doing what is good. You will all return to God, and he will clarify these matters about which you have differed. This is the 5th chapter of the Quran, verse 48. I wrote down some suggestion that can foster interreligious cooperation and understanding between evangelicals and Muslims. I'll start reading them. The first is dialogue and education. Engaging in open and respectful dialogue can help dispel misconceptions and build mutual understanding. Educational initiatives that explore both religious traditions, teachings on peace and coexistence can be instrumental. The second one, joint humanitarian efforts. Collaborating on humanitarian projects can provide practical opportunities for evangelicals and Muslims to work side by side, serving those affected by those crises and demonstrating shared compassion. 3, interfaith events. Participating in interfaith events, such as this webinar, allows for shared experiences and discussions that can lead to stronger relationships and a better understanding of each other's perspective. Number 4, community building. Establishing networks and friendships at the community level can lead to a more profound sense of solidarities and common purpose, transcending religious differences. Number 5, advocacy for peace. Joint advocacy for peace and justice in the Middle East can unite evangelicals and Muslims around a common cause, emphasizing the importance of peace-building efforts. The last point, number 6, first-hand experience and witnessing. Encouraging representatives from U.S. churches to visit the Middle East, much like Dr. Elise Cannon's trip to Israel, Palestine, allows them to observe the realities on the ground. This direct engagement enables them to talk to all parties involved, understand the complexities of the conflict, and form a position that aligns with the compassionate and reconciliatory teachings of Jesus. This approach not only adds depth to the dialogue, but also ensures that the perspectives and actions taken are rooted in the actual experiences and testimonies of those who have been a part of the conflict. This underscores the importance of informed advocacy and the Christian commitment to being peacemakers as called for in the Beatitudes. Combining this with the other strategies can create a comprehensive framework for evangelicals and Muslims to connect and collaborate effectively during crises in the Middle East or any other place. It is about putting faith into action, seeking justice, and striving for the peace that transcends boundaries and unite communities. This webinar is an example of such an effort to promote dialogue and understanding. Additionally, initiatives encouraging churchgoers to visit mosques in their neighborhoods can help build the potential for nationwide interfaith collaboration, as it is happening now in the US and in several other countries. It is essential to approach these interactions with an open heart and mind, ready to learn from one another and to find common ground while respecting the distinct beliefs and practices of each faith tradition. It's possible to create, through these efforts, a more harmonious environment that values peace and understanding over conflict and division. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Safi. Much appreciated. We'll go right along with Botrus, and we're already getting some questions, so thank you, audience, for that. Feel free to continue submitting those. Botrus.
Okay. Good evening or afternoon for you in America. Here it's late night a little bit. I'm glad for this opportunity to share on this important subject. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. As this webinar is in English and watched mainly by evangelicals from North America, or maybe some from Europe, therefore I will address in my words my fellow evangelicals in the West and not to my Muslim fellows, although there is a lot to be said also to them. Let me share a little bit about my context. I am a Palestinian Christian, but not any Palestinian, but one that is also an Israeli citizen. And not any Christian, but an evangelical with all the difficulty of being one, as I will touch on later. I also live in the hometown of Jesus, Nazareth, but it is 70% Muslim, 30% Christian. And I work in an evangelical Christian school in Nazareth that has 20% Muslim and 80% Christians from all denominations. I would say in the beginning that the issue of Muslim-Christian relationships is not on our agenda here in Nazareth on a daily basis. We live together in harmony without making fuss out of it. I'm not claiming that it's an ideal relationship without any rift or tension at times, but in our general course of the day, we just do life together in the midst of our community as Arab Palestinians in Israel, where our people, the Palestinians, are in that difficult conflict with our citizenship as Israelis. The fact that it is not a matter we discuss or have constantly on the agenda is actually a wonderful testimony of the fact that it is working. So my talk will be why this is working for us and has a good chance of working for Western evangelicals as well, if the principles are implemented with, of course, needed changes. The level I will be speaking about is the one I believe Jesus intended his followers to emphasize. What I mean by this is that in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that in the Old Testament, it is spoken, the commandment not to commit adultery. But he goes to the root of the sin, to the heart, and says that he that looks at a woman with lust has committed adultery. And then in the commandment not to kill, he went to the root of the sin of killing and spoke about slander against any fellow human being that will be considered in his eyes as killing. Therefore, I will try to go to the roots as well, to the heart and to the mind, because if that is changed, if we can change the mentality or we can change the heart of people, then different actions will just come naturally afterwards. We don't want just to go through the motions of doing activities without real everlasting change of heart or change of mind. So first we will start with heart, mind, and then actions. Why is this, I wondered, why is this connection between evangelicals and Muslims that important? I will mention only one reason, I think, for us as evangelicals, although there are plenty, and we can say a lot about it. Needless to say that we as Christians, and Jews for that purpose, are called traditionally in Islam culture as people of the book, Ahl al-Kitab, people of the book. Of course, for us as evangelicals, we are twofold people of the book. The book, of course, is the Bible in our case, or the New Testament in our case. And why is that? Because of the principle of sola scriptura. If the Bible is our sole guideline, then we have the life of Jesus portrayed in the Bible as our model. We saw his model of dealing with all peoples and religions. In the scenery of the first century, Palestine, he dealt with Samaritans, a fierce enemy at that time of the Jewish people, with Pharisees, with Sadducees, a woman, a wealthy corrupt collaborator, tax collector, widows, lepers, etc., etc. Jesus was down to earth. He leveled with people. I personally love the story in John 4, where he is dealing with a Samaritan woman. This lady had several elements that were disadvantaged at that time. From a gender perspective, she was a woman. Nationality and religion, she was Samaritan. Ethical living of pious Jewish people, she lived a loose life, to say the least. You know, she had 5 husbands, and Jesus told her, you are living with the 6th. But despite all this, he dealt with her in dignity and kindness without even embarrassing her. I think that should be our motto in dealing with everybody, of course, with Muslims. In these days of cultural and political divide, and see the elections in the USA to see the cultural divide, just watch the debate tonight. This aspect of Jesus's ministry is unfortunately overlooked. A lot of evangelical focus is, in the best case, just on salvation of humans and in dealing with it as winning souls. Then in the worst option, there is a focus on eschatological schemes that just bring more and more suffering. And that's for us here in the Holy Land. I would say there is no place for exclusive theologies. If a theology causes anguish and suffering, then please check it again. Don't mingle your theology with your nationalistic agenda. I wondered about the dynamics, what happens, why certain people, and unfortunately some evangelicals in the West also are like that. What are the dynamics of this? Dynamics, I think, is my simple thinking is being from a Western advanced country brings with it sort of a pride of your country and feeling that it is superior to other underdeveloped countries that in this time of history are struggling. Then you have a lot of evangelicals are not educated. See Mark Knowles' book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind. And they are not exposed to other cultures, thinking that they are the center of the world. There's nobody else. Add to it the narrow understanding of the Bible and the Great Commission makes them deal with others in a very functional way. In other words, they will think, my only job in the world is I should just usher unbelievers to heaven. But unfortunately, it does not include the real respect of language, history, and culture of a lot of non-evangelicals. Historically, interfaith has been a bad word among a large number of evangelicals. Maybe this is because of some liberal practices where Christians compromised their faith in order to start a meaningful, close relationship with Muslims. In my opinion, there is another way. You can be a firm believer in the Bible, but still love and dialogue with your Muslim friends. Now, talking about the war, rifts widen during war. Here, the war is happening in Israel, Palestine, when there is an additional level even. The religious aspect mingle with the nationalistic from both sides. The current war in Gaza has widened this divide. Everybody is taking sides. The opponent is suddenly colored as the devil, dehumanized, and therefore killed without any bad conscience whatsoever. I think that if evangelicals want to follow the footsteps of the Master, then we should go back to the original definition of humanity. Humans who are created in the image of God. Humans who are created in the image of God. The people in the kibbutz who surrounding Gaza who were killed on the 7th of October are humans, and we condemn what was brutally done to them. We also do not accept the situation of the Israeli hostages dying in the Hamas tunnels. But on the other hand, the context of the dehumanization of the people of Gaza and the West Bank, even before the 7th of October, cannot be overlooked. And definitely, above all this, the mass killing of people in Gaza since the eruption of war, 40,000 people killed, should be condemned, and those responsible should be held accountable. Conservative estimates talk about 2/3 of those people, of those 40,000, who are not involved in any combat. Just to put it in a reference, that's 2% of the people of Gaza. If God forbid this happened in America, then it would be 6.6 million American citizens killed. 2% of the people of Gaza, of these 2.2 million people of Gaza were killed. Another reference, just my colleague Safi mentioned 9/11. In 9/11, there were 3,000 people killed. Just imagine the comparison. I know every soul, of course, is important and precious in the eyes of God and should be precious in our eyes, but just imagine the numbers. It's really devastating. 40,000 people and continuing. Okay, what's the solution? In my opinion, there are no shortcuts. This is not a hocus pocus spell. As Muslims are people created in the image of God, we should deal with them in a Christ-like way, with humbleness and willingness to learn, with dignity. This is not just about using kind words and gentle words and polite words, but it is looking at Muslims with respect, wanting the best for them. We seek their well-being and respect their values, even if theirs are different. We are here in Nazareth, we are blessed to have a lot of evangelicals from all around the world who visit and stay in Nazareth, the hometown of Jesus. And I have been following them for at least 40 years. The ones that left, I can tell you, the ones that left an impact were those humble ones who came to learn and love like Jesus. Sometimes others would just look at Arabs in general and Muslims in particular as primitive people who are good in doing food, with delicious food maybe, and this is their only interest, and this is really insulting. There is no place for superiority for Jesus followers. You yourself, each one of us was and is a sinner, and Jesus saved us. So we need to be kind and humble and understanding with the others, including the Muslim. We should see our role as citizens of the kingdom of God and responsible for not just spreading his values, but also living them out. This is the basis for a healthy relationship with Muslims. The massive killing in Gaza and the immense suffering is a reason for those that love God or Allah in dignity to work together for justice, despite the heavy religious baggage involved. The focal point, I will say that again, is that we put the human being in the center because he or she was created in the image of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Botrus. May?
Thank you, Ben, and Safi and Botrus. I feel, even though we are distant and in different geographic spaces, I feel connected, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be together. And I'm grieved in my spirit, even as even in my gratitude. And so hearing each of your remarks, but specifically even the numbers that you shared, Botrus, and thinking about the people of Gaza, the number of deaths that's being approached at 40,000 people, that's more than half of the number of combatants of US military that were killed in the Vietnam War. And in history, most people would say the Vietnam War lasted more than 10 years. And so in less than 10 months, more than half of the US Army, members that were killed in Vietnam have been killed in Gaza, which I just, when you try to even understand what those numbers mean, sometimes I think looking at those historical points are significant. Not that every single life does not matter, but removing it from just abstract numbers, right? That's just a fact or a statistic. That the number of deaths in such a short period of time, where the vast majority are civilians and so many of them are children, it just makes my heart cry out, Lord, have mercy. So thank you for sharing that. I'm grateful to share with you today. I'm sharing with you as an individual. Normally I'm wearing my hat as Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace, but today I come to you as an evangelical. It grieves me that when I say I'm an evangelical, that's making more of a political statement in the US context today than it is a theological one. So in my household, my husband and I have an argument regularly. He says, I'm not evangelical. And I say, yes, you are. And he says, no, I'm not. And we go back and forth. And he says, I'm not an evangelical because of the politics in the US. And I say, you are an evangelical because you believe in the good news of Jesus. And that's literally what the word means. And so even just the historical identity of what it means to be evangelical, organizations like Ron Sider's Evangelicals for Social Action changed their name because in the US, to be an evangelical in many circles, is so, particularly for communities of color, or it has become so associated with one political party or with Trumpism and support of President Trump that even just the theological understanding of what it means to be an evangelical. And so I wanted to start there and say, I'm an evangelical who believes in the good news of Jesus Christ. And good news in a broken world that is not yet fully redeemed, but is in such desperate need of redemption. And I love that many of the things I heard both of you say, Safi, the love of enemy, which is a core teaching of the person of Jesus, and the core tenets of evangelicalism that I feel like are so lost in the evangelical movement today. The centering of not only, love of God and love of neighbor, but love of enemy. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about that. I was going to go through David Bebbington's 4 points of evangelicalism about the centrality of the cross and conversion of the Holy Spirit, and the centering of the Word of God and the valuing of the scriptures, but also mission to the world. And when I think of mission to the world, I saw the question that you asked, David, about what role evangelicalism and evangelization and conversion plays. I often think of the intersection of Matthew chapter 25 and Matthew chapter 28 as being the missional call for evangelicals. Matthew 25 are the verses where Jesus talks about whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. And there's a theological debate in the interpretation of those chapters, which talk about care for the poor, care for the oppressed. These are verses that also resonate strongly with Luke chapter 4, which was Jesus's very first sermon, where Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, freedom for the captives, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. And in Matthew 25, these words that talk about how should we care for those who are suffering, how should we respond to those who are hungry, there's a theological question of, are those words a commandment only to our brothers and sisters? are those words only to those who are also fellow Christians? Because the passages talk about, brothers and sisters of mine. And I think when we look at the other words of Jesus and the commandments of love God, love your neighbor, but not only that, love your enemy, I don't know how you read Matthew 25 faithfully and see it as being exclusively only to the Christian community. To me, that seems to contradict everything else we read in the scriptures about Isaiah 58 and when you look at the whole trajectory of scripture and God's call to respond to the needs of the poor, he doesn't say take care of some poor and not others. I don't see that. I don't see Jesus saying, to the woman who, has such desperate need, or to anyone who he healed or anyone that he touched. I don't see him parsing, are you a part of the community or not, which resonates with some of that exclusivity claims that we've been talking about thus far. So Matthew 28, the call to respond to the needs of the world, Matthew 25, the call to respond to the needs of the world, but then Matthew 28 to make disciples from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And I had a very interesting conversation when I was in Jordan with Prince Ghazi recently, who is a scholar of Islam, studied at Al-Azhar University in Egypt. That was his PhD. And he happens to believe that Matthew 28 was a text that does not appear in the original scriptures. And so he wants access to the Vatican archives to see if that original text exists in the earliest manuscripts, because he thinks that Matthew 28, one of the questions is, and other scholars have thought this as well, is that was used as an imperialistic mandate to go and colonize other nations rather than to share the good news of Jesus. And I think that if the good news of Jesus is not good news, then it does not come from the Jesus that I know and worship and read about in the scriptures. And when we read about Matthew 28 and making disciples, whenever we see Jesus making disciples, I don't see him beating people over the head with the Bible. I don't see him, the way that we talk about proselytization today in conservative circles, to me looks very different than the Jesus that sat, next to the woman who was about to be stoned. And he says, you who are without sin, you throw the first stone. To me, that's the evangelization of Jesus, right? The responding to the needs of the world, meeting people where they're at without exclusivity, which I think is important when we're talking about humanization. And I want to talk about what does that mean in the midst of this very moment with what's happening in the Middle East, and particularly in Gaza and in the occupied territories and in Israel. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in the midst of this very moment? I mean, fundamentally, I think it means to be someone who loves all people. And I don't know why. I mean, that might sound so simple and idealistic, and it feels almost stupid saying it. But in this moment, there's such resistance to that fundamental belief. The idea that I can just look at a little child in Gaza and love them just as much as any other human being. Why is that so hard for us to do, particularly as Americans who say that we love Jesus? Why do we discriminate against that child? I mean, I've heard conservative Christians say because that child's being raised to be a terrorist. I don't care if that child is being raised to a terrorist. Doesn't Jesus still call us to love them? And that's fundamentally not true. I mean, these false assumptions, but what is it about this dehumanization that we have either become indoctrinated in? I think some of it has to do with false assumptions, false theologies. I mean, look at the interpretations that were often taught in the American church about the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael. The idea that Isaac was blessed and Ishmael was cursed. When we look at Ishmael and Hagar, when they were put out of Sarah's home, and Hagar is in the wilderness and cries out to God, if we really believe that Ishmael and the descendants of Ishmael were cursed, wouldn't God have rejected Hagar when she cried out to him in the wilderness? But actually, God revealed himself to her in a profound way. And I would point you to, there's a fabulous book called Arabs in the Shadow of Israel that's written by a conservative theologian who has since passed, whose last name is Malouf, who wrote about how actually Ishmael in the Hebrew scriptures was blessed by God. And that this idea that the descendants of Abraham, one was blessed and one was cursed, is not a holistic reading of those Hebrew scriptures. In the midst of looking at what's been happening in Gaza, one of the passages that I've been looking at is Romans chapter 12, verse 9, that says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, but cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love and honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. And I think that that idea of what does it mean to live in harmony with one another, just even that passage about the Romans 12:9, hate what is evil and cling to what is good. Sometimes in the midst of what's happened over the last 9 months, I feel like I have trouble making sense of what's up and what's down. And I have to go back to the simplicity of people dying is evil. And I appreciate so much, Safi, you said, let's just return to the humanity of God. I think it was you who said, you know, the image of God in all people, right? That the humanity of all people, and to return to just the fundamental hate what is evil and cling to what is good. And I wonder why that is so hard for the evangelical church. One of the things that grieved me greatly after October 7th was the response of Christianity Today, and the editorial response specifically that was written by Russell Moore. Christianity Today came out and said, unless you stand with the state of Israel, essentially you are not standing on the side of God. And a number of us connected to Churches for Middle East Peace. I know Ben also wrote a response with the Network of Evangelicals for the Middle East. But a number of us responded to numerous articles that have been coming out from Christianity and saying that the ways of Jesus are different than that. And my response to Russell Moore was that God does not call us to stand with states, but that God calls us to stand with people. I'm sure we will talk more about where do we go from here, but I think, you know, my hope and prayer is that God will open our eyes to the things that we're not seeing, that we would be able to see the ways that whatever it is that's impeding the evangelical church in the United States from being able to see the ways of God, if it's our hubris, if it is our, whatever it is within us, that the scales would be taken from our eyes. And we pray often, I was at World Vision for a number of years, that God would break our hearts for the things that break the heart of God. And if nothing else, that the evangelical church in the United States would allow our hearts to be broken, but then that we would be mobilized to engage in ways that are constructive, that we would not, I saw the note earlier in the chat where the comment about how it would be better for the evangelical church in America to be silent than to criticize, you know, Palestinian voices that are advocating for justice, and how my hope and prayer is that the evangelical church in the US would allow our hearts to be broken for every person who is lost. I so appreciated you talking about October 7th, Botrus, where God is grieved by all of the death that has happened, but that we shouldn't privilege some people over others in the midst of our responding to the current crisis. So I think those are some of my thoughts and reflection, and I'm eager to have more conversation together.
Thank you, May. And I'll just pause to say thanks to each of you again for opening comments. Really rich and a lot of interconnecting themes and ideas and sentiments. And so I'm really grateful and looking forward to our conversation here. I think what I'll do is I'm going to offer one theme for this group to respond to. And then as you're each talking, I invite you to start interacting with each other. If you have questions for each other or comments for each other, now would be the time for that. But just to get that conversation going, Safi, one of the things that you offered so well to us was a set of principles for how to build rich relationships across these religious groups. And many of the comments from the others kind of pulled in the same direction. And I just wanted to ask the question about what are the blessings of achieving those kinds of rich relationships, friendships between Muslims and evangelicals. Talk about what is possible, and maybe what have each of you experienced as blessings when you've experienced those kinds of relationships.
Sure.
Yeah, so let's start the conversation there, and then wherever this panel would like to take the conversation, we'll head in that direction.
I just happened to, in my understanding to Islam, just happened that I started going to the foundation, to the definition of the terms. And in the Arabic language, you understand the word by going to its root. So Islam and Muslims both have the same root, silm, S-L-M, or Sin Lam Mim. Silm means peace. So regardless of what the Muslims been calling themselves or intending for themselves to be in the last 1400 years, in my mind, the intention of this name is for each Muslim to be a peacemaker. Because if the root is silm, Muslim is someone who put this silm into action, and Islam is if'al, mean activating peace. So peace is at the center of all this. So my intention of having a relationship with another human being is always to establish peace. This is why I love very much when I see somebody to give them a salutation of peace. I mean, we're talking about going back to the foundation of things rather than having to deal with the sediments of thousands of years of building egos over various principles. Let's talk about God's intention of sending us guidance. He intends for us to be able to be the best specimen, the best examples of who we can be in order to build peace on this planet. Any other goal or objective that we're thinking about will be secondary. If I can get with Jews, if I can get with the Buddhists and get together with the Christians, and together we can come back to the fundamental nature of who we are human beings. So how do we want to live on this planet? With peace. So as if Allah is telling me through the Qur'an and through the good news of Jesus and through the message given to Moses and to other Israelite prophets, try to worship one God, I'm your creator, and try to establish peace between you. That's the whole definition, as far as I'm concerned, of God's message to us. Everything else is details. And I like to refer here to something that Jesus have said that is, again, fundamental. He explained to the Jews that the Sabbath was created for them. They were not created for the Sabbath. The Quran is not more important than an average Muslim who is living somewhere in Bangladesh, and no evangelical have any respect for him. That human being is more important in the eyes of God than a PhD graduate of Harvard, if that PhD graduate of Harvard is arrogant. Arrogance is a deadly sin, and humbleness is what brings us closer to each other and to God. That's why I define myself as a servant. And I learned that from Jesus. You know, this is basically what I have to say.
I'd like to add about why. What does that give us? The fact that we create a relationship or a connection with Muslims. As disciples or as followers of Christ, aren't we asked to be light and salt and light?
Yes.
So if I'm going to hide, even Jesus says that in the gospel, you know, if you hide the light under the table or under, I don't know where, what good is it? And then if this salt is not used and you just keep it, it gets humid and, you know, and then you just throw it, it becomes corrupt type of salt. So if God put me in this specific place where I'm living among Muslims and Jews and all kinds of people, and I don't connect with them, why am I excluding myself? Why is this light and salt just being thrown away? My role, I'm not doing my role. Of course, it brings richness, it brings beautiful relationships, you know, friendships like with any two human beings. But when someone from a different religion, it brings an added value as well of, you know, seeing things in a different way, and it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. Like my colleague Safi mentioned in his first he quoted a verse from the Qur'an talking about if God wanted to create people in a like homogeneous, all of them the same, he could have done that, but he did not. So I think that's also important. I just want to mention one other small thing. One of the comments was Thomas. I think he asked about what can be done with the extreme religious movements, Muslim in this case, but of course there are also Christian extreme movements that I touched upon in my talk. I think our role is trying to make them weak through when people don't have anything to lose, then they take shelter in very radical and extremist and violent ideologies. Give people, be fair with them, give them an opportunity to something to lose, give them the dignity. When I have dignity, I'm not going to throw this dignity away, but when I feel that I was humiliated, my dignity is gone, I've become zero for people don't look at me even, I'm just really worthless and helpless, then I go to extreme religious extreme movements who give me promises of all kinds of different things in the other world. So I think this is the role that we should be doing through the different ways that Safi mentioned, also May mentioned all these. I also resonate with what you said, May, about the love. I think it looks simple, but it's very difficult to do. But that's the key. We don't have another key. Loving the enemy, loving the other, loving the neighbor. I think the key is over there.
Which takes me to the last question I see that says, how can we love people who are murdering the innocent people in Gaza? I think I so appreciate that question. And I think one of the things that's been so hard for me the last 9 months has been coming to terms with the hatred that I have in my own heart. The things within me that are, if I'm really honest, how could Jesus, when Jesus was on the cross, look at the person, you know, who was a murderer, who was convicted of murder, and say, you know, tomorrow you will be with me in paradise? Like, how can we really love our enemy, right? And I don't know how to do that apart from having experienced love that I don't deserve from others. And I'm not saying that like self-deprecatingly, you know, I think that I think that's kind of the heart of the question. Like, what's it mean? What's it mean to really love one's enemy? And I don't think that that means tolerating it. I don't think that that means, you know, accepting injustice. But I'd be curious other people's reflection on that question, because I feel like that question is at the very heart of the gospel. Because it's very easy to say. And I did, by the way, my second doctorate was in spiritual formation on the transformational process of learning to love your enemy, because I never had enemies until I started to work on Middle East issues. And it wasn't that I felt like I hated people, it's that people hated me. I mean, people still like will tell me like the blood of my grandchildren is on your head. I mean, I have people who, you know, and I didn't even understand this. And so I'd just be curious others' thoughts on that.
Can I add something here? There is an order in the Quran that tells me to, it says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا. O believers, be God conscious and say straight things when you're talking. Well, I feel that throughout the program, I was trying to be very polite, and I should be, but it's time to say that evangelical Zionists in the United States are more dangerous to the world, not just the United States, to the whole world, than the Zionists in Israel. The Zionists in Israel are very dangerous to themselves and their neighbors. They're going to destroy themselves and they're going to destroy their neighbors. But it's time to look at this situation not just as believer, but also as strategists, as analysts. I mean, by training, I'm a strategist. I did strategy all my life, and I know where my belief would lead me on the long term. But I also know where my enemy's belief is going to lead them. Their belief that this land is theirs in exclusion of the people who are living there. And when somebody come and knock on my door and say, move out, because God gave me your house, I can't believe, I can't accept that, regardless what they call themselves. So let's call a spade a spade. Those people are not doing themselves a favor. They're going against the logic of history. At the end, they're going to destroy themselves and a lot of innocent people with them. They're not going to be able to live by that, according to that theology for a very long time. I'm telling you. So, and the Palestinian people who are my neighbors, the Palestinian people are not going to compromise and leave their land. There is no law in the world that would say they should leave and go and live somewhere else. I was 4 years old when I saw thousands of tents suddenly appearing and a lot of people living in those tents in Lebanon, in Beirut. And I asked my dad, who are these people? Why are they coming here and living in those tents? Why don't they have homes? He said those people were kicked out of their land. That's in 1948. I was 4 years old. So to live with that injustice all of my life and still insist on loving, nobody would know what that means unless they go through it, unless they live through it. This problem of injustice been eating with me in my plate 3 times a day since I was born, since I was conscious of who I am. And it cannot continue like this. Yet in the meantime, I'm insisting on loving my enemies, insisting on sitting with them on the same table and negotiating for peace. Other Muslims are saying, are you crazy? After all they've done, after the 40,000 innocent people that died? Well, yes, despite all of this, after all of this, even if they kill me and kill my children, I will still would want to negotiate for peace. God didn't create me to hate people. God created me to love the others. Because if I love him, I have to love all his creations. He is free to deal with his creation later. That's his problem with his creation. My problem is to love everybody, to love God and to love my neighbor. Thank you.
Safi, you left us speechless. That was so good.
Well, we're talking about a very tragic situation here. And we are trying to live our principles under the hardest situation possible. It's not an easy situation to be in or to talk about.
Right.
I mean, I feel, look, I live in the United States right now, but you know, my friends here who are living in Israel or in the West Bank or in Gaza, I mean, they experience discrimination every day of the week. If Israel was as nice to the Palestinian in the West Bank as it is to the Palestinian who are living inside Israel, it would not have problems. All we're asking the Israelis is to be fair and equitable and be as, you know, equitable to the others, to their neighbors, as they are to their own people. When Isabella and Ferdinand ordered everybody to convert to Christianity, the Jews there had to find haven in the Muslim land. When they were persecuted in Europe, they came and found haven in my neighborhood in Beirut. I grew up with Jews in Beirut. The rabbi used to come and get me at the evening of the Sabbath to turn the light for him in the synagogue. We don't hate Jews. We love Jews. My own roots as a Muslim is in Judaism.
One of the themes that I'm noticing in some of the most recent comments is this maybe dual principle of, as people of the book, as Christians, as Muslims, as Jews, there is this principle of the universality of the expectation that we love. We have received love that we don't deserve, and now we are expected to offer love to all God's children, made in the image of God. So that universality principle there. But then at the same time, these distinctions between some Muslims and other Muslims, between Christians who are Jesus followers and those who are not. And I'm wondering if we can just respond as we close within that complexity, because that creates complexity. We're mostly, I think, addressing Christians on this call. And so I wonder if we could hear from any or all of our panelists a final word to believers, Christian believers who are on this call, and maybe to Christian pastors as well. We have Christian pastors in this country who are Christian Zionists. There are Southern Baptist pastors who agree or disagree with the resolutions that the Southern Baptists just made regarding how to think about and respond to the war in Gaza. There's a lot of complexity inside of the American Evangelical Church. And I wonder what this panel might say as we sign off to them. Final words of encouragement and challenge.
I just call them to review their views again. They are wrong views. As I mentioned when I shared before, that check your theology. If your theology at the end of the day causes harm to people, and they are causing harm to Muslims, to our testimony here as Christians, how can any non-Christian, even a non-believer, whatever you want to call him, when he looks at this this brand of Christianity that is a Zionist Christianity that grabs the land of others and doesn't give the rights needed, how are they going to look at this type of God that they believe? This is really a break of the testimony and the witness of of Christians and anybody claiming about Jesus. It makes people go far. If they care about winning souls, you don't win souls by this. People just hate Christianity and hate your Jesus. If this is your Jesus, I don't like him. This is what people say. Unfortunately, they don't see other type of followers of Jesus who really serve, help, sacrifice, have done centuries and centuries in Africa and other places. In the Middle East also have built schools and universities and elderly people homes, and have really sacrificed all their lives. They don't see this. They see the bad theology type of Christianity, which is very bad. I just urge them to rethink, review, study more. I don't want to say repent even. I'll keep it easy a little bit. Anyway, that's it.
My encouragement would just be to not give up meeting together. I have seen so many people on the call who I know and love, people who I haven't been with in a long time, but I feel connected to in the context of community and the gift of being in community together, and what that means, and living out in community prayer, faithfulness to what we believe about our spiritual convictions. You know, at Churches for Middle East Peace, we've been saying stand in the gap. We've been talking about giving, and that giving can be, we've been encouraging people to give in ways that will directly benefit people on the ground, but to give also to support efforts to organizations like ours at CMEP and NIMI, and that help efforts in the United States, but also taking action. We have a couple of things coming up at CMEP. 2 dates I'll give you. One is Sunday, the 21st of July. We're calling it Solidarity Sunday. And if you're on CMEP's networks or a part of our newsletter, there's more information about this in Friday's bulletin. But we're hoping that all of the churches and denominations in our network on Sunday, the 21st of July, will at a minimum pray for peace. At a minimum. So many churches aren't even talking about what's happening in the Middle East. But we're calling for churches to stand for a comprehensive ceasefire and an end to occupation, and, you know, all the things that we're calling for to work towards justice and, you know, a comprehensive resolution. On the 24th, Prime Minister Netanyahu is scheduled to speak before the joint sessions of Congress, and we'll have a prayer meeting in person in Washington, D.C. that morning. And so there will be protests all around the city that day, but those are just 2 immediate things. And then finally, I don't know if you're familiar with the Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages. That was a movement that was launched in January and during Lent in all 7 continents, in 20 countries around the world, in more than 200 cities. People walked the length of Gaza in solidarity, calling for an end to violence. We're now in phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages, of walking to members of Congress and walking to elected officials and places of power. And so I encourage you to go to that website as well, and you can find out more about that at CMEP too. So those are just some practical ways to engage that we'd encourage you to.
I'll take just the final word to say thank you again for joining this webinar. Let the conversation continue. I invite you back to the next webinar that NIMI is planning for late July or early August. The dates aren't quite set yet, but we want to have a conversation about the resolutions that the Southern Baptist Convention just passed about Gaza. We think those are important to better understand and respond to. So we're pulling together a panel of thoughtful Southern Baptists to talk with us about that, about those resolutions. You can watch our social media channels for announcements as that event comes closer. And then I also invite you, if you would like to get away from the cold in December, to come and join us in the warmth of Montecito, California, December 6th, 7th, and 8th for the NIMI retreat. We're going to be pulling together a special program and having conversations like this one, paired with the opportunity to meet each other, spend time together, get to know each other, and establish relationships with one another, which is becoming rare in this polarized world. So I invite you to consider that. Save the date will be December 6th, 7th, and 8th in California. And you can watch our website and social media channels for more details on that. And with that, we will be posting this recording within the next few days, up to maybe as long as 1 week from now, but invite you to watch for that and then share it with your networks. Thank you again for your time. Go and be blessed.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. Blessings.